Good afternoon. My name is Sara Johnson, and I'm the co-director of the Johns Hopkins Consortium for School-Based Health Solutions and a member of the eSchool Plus initiative team here at Johns Hopkins. On behalf of all the members of the eSchool Plus initiative, I want to officially welcome you to the second session in our eSchool Plus webinar series, Innovative Responses to COVID-19 Learning Loss, Building the Whole School Back Better. Our goal for this session is to explore how and why reopening schools has become such a highly charged issue for some of our most vulnerable students, and to consider what this may mean for equity, learning, and schools, both now as schools are reopening and post-pandemic. We'll also be exploring the hurdles that K-12 schools across the country continue to face in the middle of the pandemic. As we've seen, the challenges of reopening have really been divisive, particularly for families of color and for schools serving a large population of vulnerable students. What have been some of the key ideas that have helped to stem the projected learning loss of students in these situations? Today, we have invited some of the most preeminent practitioners from across the country to discuss this complex and changing landscape. So please join me as we introduce our panelists. First, I'd like to welcome Cami Anderson. Cami is a well-known figure in the world of education reform and is the former superintendent of the Newark, New Jersey Public Schools. Prior to this role, she served as executive director of Teach for America New York and as superintendent for alternative high schools and programs for the New York City Department of Education. She is the founder and managing partner of Third Way Solutions, an organization dedicated to finding innovative 21st century solutions to the most vexing problems facing government, nonprofit, corporate, and philanthropic organizations in pursuit of equity. One of Third Way's most notable projects is the Discipline Revolution Project, which works to find practical solutions to end the school to prison pipeline. So thanks so much for being here today, Cami. Next, we're honored to have with us Amelia Coleman Brown, who is Assistant Superintendent in the School District of Philadelphia. Prior to becoming Assistant Superintendent in 2017, she served as principal of the W.D. Kelly Elementary School in North Philadelphia. And before that, she was the founding assistant principal at Widener Partnership Charter School in Chester, Pennsylvania. We're so pleased to have you join us today, Amelia. We are also excited to have LaQuisha Hall, a former Baltimore City Public Schools teacher who currently works with 6 schools as an opportunity culture coach. She was the 2018 Baltimore City Teacher of the Year and is also the subject of Melinda Anderson's acclaimed book published in 2020, Becoming a Teacher. She mentors young women in empowerment program that she started called the Etiquette Academy, and is herself an award-winning author who encourages educators to practice self-care to prevent burnout and promote longevity in the field. We are delighted to have her join the conversation today as well. Welcome, LaQuisha. And finally, we have Khechara Bradford, who currently serves as the Deputy Superintendent of Learning for the Providence Public Schools. She previously served as Chief Academic Officer in Spring ISD, as well as the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction in the Fort Worth ISD. She has served in several school-based roles in the past, including as a reading specialist in San Antonio, Texas, and a reading recovery teacher in Houston. Her first and favorite job was as a pre-K teacher in Escambia County, Florida. We're so glad to have you here today. Welcome, Khechara. So thank you all again for being here. And now to our audience, a few guidelines about our discussion for this afternoon. I'm going to start by asking each of our panelists one question to get the discussion started. And then I'll be directing a series of prepared questions to the entire group for consideration. But we want you, our audience, to join too. And you can submit questions by pressing the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or you can upvote someone else's question by clicking the like button. We'll incorporate as many questions as possible, and we'll start with our audience questions about halfway through our discussion today. So with that, let's get started. So Cami, let's begin with you. You were previously a superintendent in Newark. How do you think the pandemic has changed how schools are looking for and measuring so-called learning loss? And is that even the right term? Are schools looking at the right measures of academic progress right now, especially for our most vulnerable students? And what are some of the ideas that schools should be pursuing that can help us move beyond this business as usual in reopening schools?
So first of all, thanks for having me. It's amazing to be on this all-female power panel. I'm already it's already making my week, so it's great to be here. Gosh, so much to unpack there. I mean, I guess first, I do want to hold two competing sort of facts in the space. One is there are definitely students for whom the pandemic has taken a challenging situation, made it worse, whether it's because they were navigating some challenges at home and therefore didn't have, time to get to a computer, didn't have a computer, or the type of learner that really thrives in relationship to other people, who might be in an environment where it's impossible to find dedicated space. I mean, so that's sort of one truth that we know to be true, and another truth, which I think is interesting, and if we have the courage to steer into it, could really lead us some good places. There are kids who are thriving right now, and it's not, it's sort of not cutting along traditional lines, and partly because school wasn't awesome for all kids before this, particularly students of color, particularly students who are struggling. A lot about the cultures and climates and relationships that we have or haven't built in schools, has created a tremendous mistrust. I think it's part of the reason why we see disproportionately Black and brown families not coming back. Not all of them, I'm just saying statistically speaking. So I think one thing is just we have to hold both those truths. Like, we have to be real that there are a lot of students that have struggled, and have struggled even more so emotionally and practically, right? And that there are students who have thrived, and we have to lean into both of those learnings and do so with clear eyes and see what we can learn. And the second thing is, we do need to know where kids are academically. I feel strongly about that, not in a what did we lose, but sort of where are young people in terms of what they know and are able to do in reading, math, writing, so that we can figure out how to meet them where they are and craft some really smart content solutions, so that we can have multiple on-ramps to deep content, right? That's our job. I don't love the learning loss thing, because it implies that we were doing what we needed to be doing pre-COVID, which we can talk about, and B, it's very deficit based. At the same time, I think we need to be frank. There are some young people for whom this has been catastrophic, right? And there are some young people for whom it's unlocked a whole other level of productivity that we should have thought about before COVID. And then last thing, and I'll stop because I'm dying to hear what the other folks are going to say. The places where students are getting online, engaging in online content, coming to hybrid learning, coming back, expressing desire to come back, is where we have deep, trusting, purposeful relationships that have been built. I could not be more of a proponent of high quality instructional materials, because I think that's the key to everything. Teaching kids how to read thoughtfully, putting awesome content in front of them that's culturally competent. That said, if we don't have trusting, deep relationships with students, then none of that learning will be enabled. And that was true before COVID, and it is now laid bare. It is laid bare. You see cities, I'm sure represented here, with principals and teachers who have done that very well and very purposefully, and ones that have not prioritized that. And I think we're seeing that across the board. And I feel nervous that piece is absent from the conversation, that of course we have to talk about physical safety, absolutely. And we have to talk about emotional and psychological safety, because if those things aren't present, right, we could have the best online content on the planet, and we're not going to rise to the occasion of this moment, which is why I hope that we have the courage to lean forward and not the desire to fall back. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks. I think you really touched on some important issues here, into leaning into both truths and highlighting the important role of physical and psychological safety for our students. So I'd love to return to those. I want to turn now to Amelia, and given your role as an assistant superintendent in Philadelphia, what have you seen over the past year in terms of students and learning loss since public school students have been learning from home? And in particular, in your experience, has the pandemic exacerbated some of these existing achievement gaps? What are some of the challenges that you are seeing on the ground in Philadelphia? And what are some of the emerging ways of thinking that you hope are going to continue after schools reopen?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And I'm probably going to underscore a lot of what Cami shared. But first and foremost, I just want to shout out what I have observed principals and teachers and parents doing like never before, like working in collaboration. Like these stakeholders have done an amazing job. I've seen principals with the most serious administrators put on costumes to encourage virtual participation. I've seen teachers on holidays like drop off care packages. So I just want to just echo that and shout that out, that we've seen some amazing things happen across this pandemic. And I hope that we don't lose sight of that. But, you know, to underscore some of what Cami highlighted is that in spite of that, there are students across certain communities that are still struggling. Student practice is still struggling. We're unable to really ensure, to monitor, to respond to student practice in the ways that we would do in an in-person situation, right? Across vulnerable communities, we know that teachers are working to address learning loss, unfinished learning, right? Unfinished learning, and expose students to grade level content at the same rate, right? That is a challenging task in itself. And we know when we do our best work, when we're looking to do our best work, we do it close up, you know, right up against the people and with the people that we're doing the work with. And that doesn't happen. That isn't happening during the pandemic. So I do like that Cami shared that for certain groups, they're doing fine, right? But for other groups and the communities where I serve, it's still a struggle in spite of our best efforts. So I am team, let's get our students back, #safely, right? As best we can. And I think that, you know, with the vaccinations, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm excited that that's possibly going to happen soon. But if I could just speak in reference to has the achievement gap been exacerbated? I can't say that if without a pandemic, that the achievement gap would have closed within this year, right? I can't see that happening, or would have happened had we not been in living in a pandemic. But I think what has intensified is the focus on systemic racism. I know that the pandemic has rendered us still in a way that we would not have been if we weren't in a pandemic. And, you know, I've had my share of losses across my family, so I'm not at all saying that the pandemic is a good thing. But I do know what has intensified was a necessary conversation about the inequities across marginalized communities. And right now, unlike ever before, what I am experiencing and hearing with alongside teachers and school leaders is a call of action, a call to do things drastically different across and within our classrooms with our teachers, supporting them differently. So what I'm very much excited about is now we're thinking of practical ways to dismantle racism, right? We're working with teachers to ensure that in classrooms, we're having critical conversations, right? Every classroom is thinking about how we bring the funds of knowledge that all students possess to the learning experience, whether you are Black, white, Asian, from a wealthy, affluent family, or from an economically depressed neighborhood. Like teachers are thinking differently and leaders are thinking differently about how to support those teachers. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Amelia. I am really interested to circle back to some of the concepts that you brought up and in unfinished learning and opportunities to have new kinds of conversations and equip educators with different kinds of tools to have those conversations. So thank you so much for bringing that up. LaQuisha, it's your turn to turn the conversation, and you bring this deep experience as a classroom teacher as well as the perspective of an opportunity coach. And you really have been a champion of classroom teachers. In your experience and sort of tying into what Amelia was saying, do you think that teachers have sufficient training and support to keep all students on grade level this year as they work in virtual, hybrid, and remote learning situations, or sometimes they're doing all three at once? And how are teachers reaching our most vulnerable students? How do we get those students back into the fold who have felt disaffected or who have fallen behind due to the pandemic?
So thank you for having me today. I'm honored to be here among all this greatness on this call, and also honored to represent Baltimore City Public Schools. I absolutely adore my district, and I know the challenges that were shared by our former speakers. So even in things that we love, correction has to be a part of the process in order to watch something grow, right? And so there are some corrections that need to be made within my district, within all districts nationwide right now, in order to see the progress that we need to see for our students. I want to highlight that a lot of the conversations that we're having now are not conversations that should have started now. They are conversations that should have happened pre-pandemic. As far as teacher training, so y'all are looking at a teacher who, number one, I didn't follow all the rules, and I did that intentionally to further support my students. So I would deviate from curriculum as needed to support my scholars with troublesome issues that needed to be discussed. I believe in education in the classroom. I also, took it upon myself to maybe do things that some say teachers aren't required to do, because I believe that we are part of a village. We should recreate these villages across our nation to further support our scholars. But part of that conversation also needs to be creating these villages for our educators as well. So we can't expect educators to deliver something to our scholars that isn't being delivered to them, right? And so when we talk about teacher training, you ask if it's sufficient. I don't believe that there's a such thing as sufficient training, just like I don't believe there's a such thing as sufficient education, meaning it should be ongoing. As long as you are alive, you should continuously learn. That's why I called my student scholars. I wanted them to embrace that idea of learning even beyond the classroom. But the same applies to our teachers. And I'll be honest with you, being in the classroom all the way up through the pandemic beginning, I found that I had a lot of colleagues that did stop learning. What had happened and what had transpired was they were given a curriculum and they just kind of regurgitated that to the students daily. And in PD, we'd be doing other things, grading papers, making phone calls. So it ended up being a time where we weren't really learning anything new that would help further develop our students in a new and creative, innovative way. I think the pandemic has pushed us to have to face that. And so now, because you can't hide behind that lesson plan binder with the crusty old lesson plans that you wrote 5 years ago and you're trying to reuse those, we are now on the computer. Now you got to find an app. Now you got to figure out a way to get the books to your scholars. Now it's so many different things. The district's responsibility now is to fully equip the educators with what they need in order to make these things happen. And we can't have status quo, mundane professional development anymore. We have to make that look the way we want it to look in the classroom. So we want differentiated instruction for our scholars, virtually, in person. We need differentiated professional development. What that means is there were teachers who were using Google Classroom before the pandemic started. There were teachers who were being innovative with technology, but there was some who barely use a computer in their classroom. And so we need to put teachers in the spaces where they can thrive so they can allow their students to thrive. So I think at this point, professional development and learning for teachers has to be ongoing. We will not arrive at a place where we have fully learned all that we need to learn in order to move our young people forward. I also think that it's important for us to acknowledge that teachers have been creative, even in person prior to the pandemic. They've always been creative in their approaches to teaching our young people, but I think now is forcing us to look at creativity in a different way, to infuse things within that creativity that we didn't consider before, like social emotional learning. That was not a buzzword in education. It wasn't a consideration in the past. And so, it might even have been a thing where teachers might have said, that's not my problem. You're here to do, my work, and let's move forward. we have to stop and pause now and look at each other as humans. That's how we start that work that's important with racism, with equity, with all of those things. We all have to pause and look at each other, adults and young people, as humans. Consider how we all are feeling and move forward in support of each other. And that goes from district leadership down. Sometimes, people on the bottom looking up, they get mad at the people above them, and people above looking down, they mad at the people below them. We have to rebuke that cycle, so to speak, and take a united front seriously, especially in public education, because of the suffering that many of our students are facing and experiencing right now.
Thank you so much, LaQuisha. And I love the idea of thinking about the pandemic, not only as a time of real turmoil, but also as an impetus for change and for growth and creativity, kind of echoing some of the comments that Cami was making earlier about that it hasn't been one size fits all. There are aspects of this that we can continue to leverage to do a better job. So thank you for that. And finally, I'd like to turn to you, Khechara, in your role as Deputy Superintendent for the Providence Public Schools. Your district made news last September, and it has continued to make news when it decided to reopen in person. And that was really long before many districts around the country made that move. So what do you think have been some of the key learnings from that decision? And do you think that being open in person has helped to keep students on track academically? Have some of your students benefited more than others? Would love to hear more about that.
Sure. So good afternoon. That's a great question. I think that keeps us all up at night, all the time, ongoing, because as you've heard, there's no it's not black and white anymore. We're living in a lot of gray. I think one of the benefits of returning was the support that we knew our communities needed, just as far as internet access, electrical access, water, food, the stability of having someone caring there with you for 8 hours of the day, and knowing that we have families at work and that they weren't always afforded the same opportunities to work from home. And so that, I think, was more from like a social emotional wellness, wraparound services and support level. I will say that even with us coming back, we have A/B scheduling at the secondary level. So not all students every day, they have an A day and a B day. We've also just had some times of closure due to weather, snow, different testing abnormalities or testing environments where we've had to go to more asynchronous learning. So even at the best of being open, we still haven't had the same amount of time in front of our students as we would have previously had. And I think that it's also the engagement is so different now moving into distance learning. And so bringing students back, and then what environment are we welcoming them into, and what are we still referring students and having out of school suspensions, even though we're saying we're focused on social emotional learning and wellness. So I think even with being open, there are so many other like as you heard earlier, system-wide aspects of equity that we didn't have beforehand. And in just coming back in person, we're not solving or addressing, because there's still, why are we failing students in the mix of a pandemic and assigning Fs to, or just even looking at truancy and how we think about that, or do we just support in other ways than having, court, taking families to court over truancy. So we've been rethinking a lot of our systems, and I think bringing students back really gave us a way to analyze some of what we were doing before and how we can just turn it upside down and do it completely differently, both in our practices that we established this year, but as well as in policy. So thinking of a long-term policy that really needs to be in place around, discipline and behavior and attendance, and how some of those that we've had as structures just, systematically haven't supported all of our students. I will say that we've had the opportunity to collect data around our students and learning. And I agree also that when we look at our data pre-pandemic, we were failing, and we are a majority, Black and Brown school district. And so the majority of our students were not being successful at Tier 1 expectations. And so that's not a problem that we can intervene, or that we can special ed, or that we can put it into different programs. It really is just looking at our system and saying, before the pandemic, we didn't have great learning outcomes for our students. And so we did lose time. We lost face time And that's something that we can work to recruit through innovations like summer learning or extended day opportunities. But we're also noticing that our kids don't need necessarily more academics. They need more engagement. They need more like community clubs, book clubs. Making learning fun and personalized, I think, is where we have to transition and shift. Because if we just return and do more of what we did before, we're not meeting the needs of our whole community. And so I think lessons learned is like how to teach during a pandemic, how to engage families during a pandemic, how to engage students, especially at the secondary level, when they're just, what's the motivation to show up every day? And they really are calling our bluff. And we're seeing that as a system, the compliance structures that we had were really harmful. And now we're being much more open to, I think, student voice and family choice, and still allowing virtual learning opportunities. We have about 3,000 of our 24,000 students who have selected full virtual learning. And so we're also looking at, what does that look like in the future? And our students being successful, I'm sure many are, but we're also thinking of factors like our, like reports on child abuse have gone down dramatically because students aren't there in front of their teachers to see if anything's, or to have that reporting. And so I think in some ways it's, what does counseling look like in the virtual environment? What do wellness checks look like in the virtual environment? We didn't have systems for that. And so that's something that we're thinking of, like really building out more strongly for the upcoming year if we have that virtual option available.
Thank you so much, Khechara. I think that I really resonate with that idea that just being open in and of itself is not an intervention. If we don't learn from our experiences, things may not change on their own. So we really have to be thinking about how do we bring some of our goals and plans for what needs to change into the reopening process. So I want to return to a thread that we've talked about a lot and dig in a little bit around this question of learning loss. And I think, Amelia, you called it unfinished learning. And we've talked a lot about the conversation of unfinished learning, learning loss, and gaps, and particularly those conversations have often revolved around racial and ethnic lines. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts about where we're going with the next conversation about learning loss. What should be our priorities as we start to engage in a conversation about both addressing individual students' needs in terms of learning and then sort of broader equity considerations as we reopen?
Yes, and I think, I think LaQuisha really highlighted the emphasis on teacher learning, right? So if we refer to the Wallace report that just came out recently, there are 3 areas of focus, right? People, instruction, and organization. So really been working across with my principals to ensure that we're organizing ourselves across the schools to enhance and really increase and enhance teacher learning experiences, right? So as we're looking for student practice to improve, we have to make sure that we're ensuring that teacher practice improves, right? And looking at the teacher as not an empty container, but really looking at them as agents in this change. And I know Cami mentioned the fact that we have some leverage as leaders to ensure that curriculum is at a level where we can feel confident with ensuring teachers that autonomy to be creative. I think that we've really had some missteps across our system at large, right? How we focus our efforts, and I don't think this is all new information, right? We go back to the old books, right? Linda Darling-Hammond has been speaking about professional learning experiences being content specific and there being a space of collaboration across our school communities. This isn't new information, right? Tony Bright's work around trust, right? We can't be in this work if we're not in relationship with each other. So I think as we are moving forward and thinking about how do we accelerate, right? I think we have to be comfortable with going slow and going deep. And I think deep learning can happen like it has happened over these past few months. I don't think we've had as much deepness in our learning as we've had in these last few months. And that's because we work together. We respect the fact that we are interrelated, and teachers, community advocates, politicians, leaders, right? We've come together intentionally on behalf of students. And just want to say that thinking about our most vulnerable communities, right? If we keep working the way that we have during this pandemic with our most vulnerable students top of mind, we're going to ensure greatness for everyone. If we look at what we're doing for those at the margin and we do our best work there, we're going to ensure that our society at large have what's best. Right. And I think as a country, right, we're not where we want to be. We always focus on our most vulnerable communities, and we should, but we're not where we want to be as a country. And I think we have all of the resources, but I think that now we're thinking better about how we collectively come together to reinforce the resources and use past research to do and make better decisions on behalf of all children. Hope I answered your question, Sarah.
Can I just add a quick example there? Just that I'm connecting to so much of what you just said, what you all said, really. But one learning for us, so there's Discipline Revolution Project. What we do, right, is we work with school systems leaders and school leaders to really unpack what do schools need to be awesome at to ensure that students can thrive and be seen, felt, heard, their identities affirmed so that they don't feel the need to use negative behavior to communicate, right? And then what are all the systems that need to be true to respond to inevitable struggle and difference and conflict, because it's part of life, right? So we kind of tunnel at the both end. And I'm only saying that to say this. During this pandemic, we've had to pivot, just like everyone, to online adult learning experiences, right? Oh my gosh, you all, I'm like not amazing at this, but I was like, let me just get on it, right? Let me lean in. And we have had such incredible experiences with these communities of practice, with superintendents, school leaders around what does that mean? What does that look like, sound like, feel like? What does it look like, sound like, feel like to create emotional and physical safety? What are the implications for people, policy, practices? And we've done it in a way that's about co-construction. We know some things from research, right? But they are learning some things by invention. And it's about us helping to create the learning space. And what's amazing is we've gotten such incredible feedback, which I honestly would have never predicted, because I'm a theater person. And so I'm like, oh, you build relationship and momentum, like partly by people's energy, partly by, being in the space. And I still believe that. But what I learned from that is two things. One, strong agree with everyone who's said, but LaQuisha in particular, around, people watch what you do, not just what you say. So how we model high quality adult learning is critical, both in person and online, because if we can't pivot, then we can't expect, right? And two, at this point, we have to figure out a way to sort of manage the now and look around the corner and say, if we open schools in the fall in a different space, some hybrid, some distance, what is true to attend to the well-being of staff, students, and faculty? Like, what is true? Literally, what's true? Like, what are the, Khechara mentioned a lot of this, right? Everything from issuing summons around truancy, like calling kids to hearings, like we're talking about racial justice and decriminalizing police, but can we please bring that to schools? My goodness, if I see one more summons, my head will explode. So what needs to be true to attend to child and family and staff well-being, right? And then we have to be courageous in tunneling at that two ways. One is like, what is all the stuff we have to start, build, but what's all the stuff we have to stop, to actively stop, right? And that's the part we never want to do. We're like, we're going to try to build this new thing and we're going to put it on top of this mountain of dysfunction and inequity and racial injustice and discrimination against students with disabilities. And we're just going to like put something new on top of that mountain. So looking around managing, I am so empathetic to all of you, because you are like running it right now. My goodness, I feel like all of the love to all of you, because I've been there, but managing the now, figuring out how to look around the corner and doing so with like a courageous attitude about what do we need to start, but also what do we need to actively dismantle. And so like that is so much work. And, but it's the prize, right? Like if we just get into like what we're doing now, then I worry we're going to miss the opportunity, even though I fully empathize about why it's been so consuming. So the question I have with all these resources, how do we really meet the needs of folks right this second, right? I get it, which are huge, but how do we also like engage in radical redesign where we're looking around the corner courageously regarding building and also stopping dysfunction in a very clear-eyed way, both around the pandemic, but also the dual pandemic of racism and other discrimination in our schools, as well as, COVID. It's a big, tall order. I get it. So the question is, how can we marshal resources to like actually get that done?
Cami, I just wanted to say that I appreciate you mentioning actively dismantling, right? Because we've been talking about dismantling things for how long in education, and it hasn't been active, right? And I just, and I apologize if this is too much, but I'm an English teacher, so we always got to give examples, right? But if you just consider, you know, you hire a painter, you call a group of painters to come into your home and do this work, right? And they walk into your house and they start, you know, putting down the essential materials, and they start putting the paint in the pan and rolling the paint. If you didn't ask me what color I wanted, you got to get out my house. You can't just come in here and do what you want to do. And that is one of the things I want to address, is that that's what we're doing to our kids right now. We are walking in their house with the paint color, with the, oh, I know how to do this job, just leave it to me. And you're supposed to sit back and watch me repaint your house with no input. And they're not for it anymore. I think the biggest thing that we have to do is dismantle that fixed mindset of all of these leaders, all these adults thinking that they have all the answers. When is the last time we asked our students what they needed and honestly heard them out and acted on what they shared? What I mean by that is we quick to come up, we need SEL, we need this, we need that. The kids will tell you what they need. And it doesn't even matter what the age difference is. They can tell you at all levels. I feel hurt when this happens if they're in elementary school. I feel happy when my teacher says or does this. And at the high school level, they don't have any cut cards. They'll tell you just straight up, this is what we need. We are sick of that, you know, so on and so forth. So I said all that to say, one of the things we have to dismantle is always seeing ourselves as the experts, seeing the leadership in our young people and going to them because they are our primary stakeholders and saying, what do you need right now? You're the one in your home logging into Zoom every day trying to learn. What can I do to further support you? Thanks for that, Cami.
I agree. I wanted to just tag on that we've started having these student learning summits where we just get student voice and that's it. And they're the only ones speaking. And it's amazing. They will tell you, I mean, everything from the food at school. We want nutritious food that has they said all the different food groups, like they want the protein that, you know, they are very specific as to, because I was like, okay, tell me more about this. Tell me about the food. Even they said, you know, we're not okay. We need people to check in on us, like our wellness. And I was like, okay, tell me what that looks like. Like, what do you see? And they said, like, we just need someone to talk to, like, listen to and to talk to. Like, if there was time for us to sit around and like tell what's going on, because I can tell when my friends are down and they know when I'm down, but we don't have anyone to talk to. Like, as simple as that. Like, they just need an opportunity and a forum to talk and let it out. And so it is lifting and elevating student voice. And I agree, we had second graders attend. And they're able to talk about, like, you know, if you were the superintendent, what would you change? Oh, well, if you were the principal, what would you keep the same at your school? You know, describe your favorite teacher. What were the things that they really did to engage you in the learning or to get you excited about learning? You know, what about school do you most enjoy? You know, and even asking them about their future and what they want to do, they know. And so what we're working to do is to map some of our funds that we're receiving towards, like, what do our learners really want and need, but also like allowing teachers and principals and even students to put in for like innovative grant ideas to say, like, this is something that I want to bring to my campus, outdoor classroom or something like that. So I agree completely. It's time for us to take off the expert hat and engage with our communities and parents. Like, we think we know, but do we really know? Like, why the camera is off? Like, let's talk about it. Like, let's have a conversation. Versus us saying, okay, we need more math, we need more reading, we need more time. And if we do have more time, what do we fill in that time? And it is engaging with the community, our learners, and putting them at the center. And then I think teacher voice, also just continuously elevating teacher voice and school leader voice. The more we can do that, I think the more we're headed in the right path coming out of these pandemics.
Fun fact on that, sorry, because I can't help it. My Hopkins friends will love this. The student attitudinal data, right? Everyone knows this is turning out to be as correlative in terms of predicting outcomes as even teacher observation data. And I know it's really uncomfortable to say that because the implications are a little bit crazy, but it's, you know, students, to everyone's point here, they can often be the most effective mirror in pointing the way to what we need to be doing.
I want to just follow up on something that I heard from all of you, which is that we're going to be here, we're going to be increasingly trying to embrace, or we should be trying to embrace voice and choice, whether that's parents, whether that's students, whether that's school leaders, whether that's teachers. And so as we think about remote learning, it seems to me like there's going to be a large fraction of parents and caregivers who decide that remote learning is the best option for them, or students who decide. How are we going to manage teacher voice and parent and student voice together when those create some complexities of teaching in person, teaching online? How do we manage that and still make sure that we can keep all of our students moving forward?
That's a really good question. I think we've mapped out some scenarios and also looking at some different instructional delivery models that we could do, from, you know, concurrent teaching on one end to split teaching and scheduling, where, you know, I may teach the students in person first period and then virtually second period, or, you know, in the morning I'm teaching in person and then in the afternoon I'm teaching my students virtually, to a full continuing, like with a virtual learning academy option for families. And then I think it's also like keeping everyone's, I think safety is a ongoing, you know, just how comfortable our families feel with our school safety, how comfortable our teachers feel. So I think as we have like more of the vaccine information and, you know, just awareness to what are some of the opportunities, but then I think it's fleshing it out and then finding like, okay, which group of teachers are best suited for this model all the way through. And so I think it's having a few different models that you're comfortable with kind of flexibly playing with over the next few months, and then getting input and feedback, you know, while we still have time to map out our strategy for the upcoming school year.
And I would just add that, to Khechara's point, it has been trial and error, by having some of that trial happen off stage, right, with the adults. So really through practice. And Philadelphia has adopted the phase-in model, and it has given us an opportunity to really learn about this experience. And I think it goes back to like really leaning into these classroom spaces and hearing from the parents and the students and the teachers what is working best. So really taking advantage and going slow, but being intentional about how we learn over the next few months, I think is going to be very important. And like I think Dr. Anderson said in one of her interviews, parents are still voting with their feet, right? So as they start to see us getting better, and they can see us getting better virtually, right? And now in some of the hybrid experiences, they will increase. We will see an increase in the number of students returning back to schools. But we have to stay connected. We have to continue to stay in these spaces where we're learning from each other.
I agree 100%, Amelia, and I actually put that in the chat that we have to redesign school collectively, meaning having those conversations with teachers, students, parents, all parties, and finding out what's working best for them and moving forward. But one of the things that I would like to highlight is that we have to honor all voices in the conversation. So what I find happening now in the spaces around me is it's like a majority rules kind of thing. And I don't think that's fair, because when you consider if you have a classroom of 30 students and you have only 2 students who seem to be disengaged, your responsibility as that leader is to engage those 2 students as well. You cannot leave them off to the side because they're not a part of the majority. And so I think it's important for us all to hear that those 2 out of 30 students matter just as much as the other 28. And what I'm hearing right now is a lot of pushback, because it's like if the majority is on a certain bandwagon, they all want to go in that same direction, but we can't leave the 2 behind. And so just honoring all voices in the conversation. And once we do that, I think we'll have more buy-in from our students as well, because they'll have those choices.
And I just want to, I mean, honestly, I literally thank you, because I was actually going to say, we have this principle we call the 20% project, which is what if we put the 20% of students who struggle the most at the core of our planning for once at the core, not the margins, but at the core. And we actually use that as a redesign principle. I think two things would happen. It's the same thing with inclusion and special education, right? I think one, we would come up with far more innovative and different in a good way pieces that would lift all boats and would for once make the students who are the most marginalized not the last thing we think about, right? So I think it would both be morally just. Finally, she says, as the former alternative high school superintendent who felt like half of her job was to serve them and the other half was to yell at the system so that we didn't need that system. What if we actually design for them purposely, right? Then I think it would lead us to a better place across the board. And that leads me to a second thing I want to say, which I feel the tension. I'm just like, just to add a little complexity in the mix, I believe in voice and choice. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we are in danger of trying to be all things to all people and nothing to no one. Like we have to solve for something. Like I'm getting these surveys where I'm like, do you want chicken, steak, fish, filet mignon, potato salad, Caesar? I'm like, you can't even serve one of these. Just pick one and serve it well, okay? Because I know that there is no way you can, it's like 7-dimensional chess. There is no way you can solve for all of it. So the other thing is just that tension between, one, exactly what you said, which is like, who actually, you have to solve for something, and it's usually the people at the mic, right? The people with the loudest mic. So, but you have to solve for something. And so I'm concerned about that. And the other thing I'm concerned about is us just being very real and transparent with families and community members. Like, we can't solve for all of that. Like, I literally get these menus and I'm like, it's mathematically impossible to solve for all of those variables. There's no way. So then at some point there's a values decision that's made about what you're solving for. And of course, I would argue that it's about the 20%. Again, not just because I think it's morally right, because I've been at the back of the line all the time, but also because I think it'll lead us to innovation. But I just think we have to be real about that. And I'm just like, I would be a parent, by the way, just because I've been there. I'd be like, yes, let's be real. We can't solve for everything. So let's choose what we're going to solve for and do it in a high quality manner, and do it in a way that puts the 20% at the core.
And I would also add to that, a great points. I agree completely, is looking outside of our schools to find who can walk alongside this journey with us and who can partner. And I agree with your point. Like, there's so many menu, but we've actually started looking, especially for summer learning, like who are the community partners who do some of this work really well. That may be non-academic, like they offer yoga, for teenagers, or just other, even parent groups that can come in and, help in the cafeteria, or translation, or, parent-to-parent networks that we can establish that help, differently abled, parents of differently abled students. So I think it's also thinking through what other supports are out there where we see our limitations. Are there other healthcare, providers that can come in and partner with us? And so that's where we've just been expanding our network.
I was going to add to that, to just say that I think that, I don't know if you're asking all the right questions sometimes, right? So like, when you think about what can we solve for, right? So I think we should always be thinking about solving for a quality learning experience for all students, and doing that with those 20% in mind will really leverage what we do across our learning organizations, right? And I know this year across our district, we really focused on wellness and foundational skills, right? So thinking about but there was some really thinking around like, how do we get there? Like, when we tried to identify like what should be our priorities, it went back to what would be the most advantageous actions we can take as adults that will strengthen the student and teacher experience, right? And then you start to think about like, then what resources do we have available that can help that happen, right? Right now, we have a potential booming opportunity with Outward Bound, because we're looking at those rising 7th graders who've never had a middle school experience, right? And we all know you have to Maslow before you bloom, right? So we're thinking about like, how can we use these summer months to get them into an outdoor experience where we are supporting their social development and providing opportunities for them to build relationships, take on some leadership roles, right? If not for anything, we learned and we're reminded that the 21st student is so far ahead of us, and we are facilitators of that learning experience, and we just haven't done the best job, I think, over the past few years, but now we have a chance to do so.
I want to follow up on something you've all said. This is sort of the final question for our conversation, and I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how we create these new learning spaces. If we do, in fact, focus on students at the margins and we take those 20% and we put them at the core, what would that look like in the fall? How do we get there, particularly when we do that partially remotely, or we may not have any in-person contact with those students or their parents and caregivers? What do we need to do in order to build our schools back better and to support those students at the margins between now and September?
Save me from myself.
I actually was thinking you should go first because you brought that up, but I just wanted to say that we have to walk into this with an open mind. As much as I'm an advocate for educators, I do find that many of my colleagues are closed-minded when it comes to the changes and shifts needed in education. And so we have to come out of the comfortability we had in the past, the way things used to be done, and be okay with embracing new innovations, ideas, and opportunities for our kids. We need to extend ourselves in ways that we may not have before, even as educators. And I know a lot of people will say, well, that's not what I signed up for, but that's the direction that we're headed to. So you're going to have to make a choice at this point in your career. Like, is this what you want to do? Because our kids' futures are at stake. And then also, again, remember to ask the kids first, ask them. They're our primary stakeholders, and continue to build relationships with them, even virtually. That is highly possible. I've seen it happen with some amazing teachers. And also, as was mentioned in the chat, catering to student interests will be a game changer in re-engaging our kids and creating that entry point for them. When we throw what looked like school from in-person learning at them on a computer, they can further become disengaged. And so if we got them logged in, we need to then hook them in. And that's more what needs to be considered when we discuss curriculum, when we discuss testing, when we discuss what that looks like when they come back, even potentially hybrid. And then also consider student and family resources. That will be essential, providing mentorship, providing opportunities from the community. Sometimes community want to support us, but they don't know how. So opening the door to allowing them in to provide resources like Cami's organization is doing for our school districts and others. It's important to engage our neighbors, the churches, the activists, all the stakeholders who want to see our kids succeed but have been pushed out of school because they're not the parent or the primary care holder, child on the identification emergency card. That has to be thrown out the window. Not saying to let everybody in the schools, that's not what I'm saying, but allowing partnerships to fully embed themselves within the culture and climate of education so our kids can see a reason for moving forward with us. Because I think part of the learning loss is we're losing our kids overall.
Like I said, I'm so glad there is so much that I want to lift up there. We talk about the 6 Ps, and I'll go quickly. The first is first principles. Like, what are we solving for, right? Or like things like we have to be as purposeful about wellness as we are about academics. Things like we have to put 20% at the core. Things like we want to offer choice, and we're going to wrestle with the tension of being all things. So first principles, people, how are we using staff, right? There are folks that have been crushing it online, right? How do we like learn from them that crushing it who weren't before, right? Small group instruction, peer coaches, like we need to think out of the box about roles and responsibilities and do so in a way that applies to the learning that we've seen. Policies, right? We went through some of these. truancy, discipline, grading, seat time, all the guardrails. We need guardrails, and that's part of our job, right? But like, we need to think about them in a new context, practices. So that's all the things about curricula, tools, assessments, partnerships, right? So that's everything for how do we interact with the local police department to, we've been invited into families' homes for the first time. Happy birthday to us. We should have been there all along. So how do we learn from that and keep that going? And also, how do we expand the definition of family? To your point, only 30% of kids are bio mom, bio dad, right? But you wouldn't know it looking at our forms and our practices, right? So partnerships, and then power dynamics, right? Which is, again, back to who has the microphone and who makes decisions. So if we sort of use those 6 Ps as almost like a mental checklist, because it can be overwhelming. Like, how do you break all that down? Like, zero in on the things that are highest leverage, right? And also other things folks have brought up here, like time and summer, and I'm all for the non-academic ways of connecting with kids. That is definitely what my son needs right now, by the way. Like, he's suffering from us being the only adults telling him what to do at 11 years old. Not cute. So all of that is how we think about just sort of organizing it, figuring out highest leverage, and choosing the most high leverage actions, so that we don't try to do everything and do nothing, but also be courageous in rethinking.
I would say everything Cami said, right? underscore. But I just going back that we have to remain connected in this work, and Cami said it best. Like, we have to focus on the now and the later, right now, right? Like, really sitting down at these various tables and planning for the teacher and student experience to be better, right? Using that data, we have to do that right now. And if we want it to be systems work, we have to talk about it, we have to document it, and be committed to monitoring that progress over time. So there's various ways to do it: plan, study, act, do, like whatever process you adopt. Like, you really have to own it, and it should just keep students at the center. Keep students at the center.
Khechara, do you have a last word?
I think my last word is for us just to really embrace that school doesn't have to be what it was before. And we saw, radical change. And I think our current model was designed for a factory where every, child is kind of in their seat, in their row, and the teacher's at the front. And we were, pushing students out to work in a factory or to get those type of jobs. And by and large, they were white male students that we wanted to be successful. And so now our country is so different, our world is different. And I think we can use this pandemic as a leverage point to say, let's rethink schooling. Our students missed some schooling. Doesn't mean they missed out on learning, but let's rethink schooling in a traditional sense, in every sense, so that we really can get to student learning, which I don't think has been our priority if we just look at our data and our outcomes and our results. So just allowing this pandemic to truly change us so that we're better on the back end of it.
Well, thank you. That's a great way to leave us. I want to thank all of you for joining us. And this was a really inspiring and insightful discussion. We are going to continue to examine how American education is being transformed by the pandemic. Next week at 4 p.m., we're going to tackle teacher choice and vaccines and the reopening of school. And we're going to look at equity issues. Our guests will include Raymond Ankrum, the superintendent of the Riverhead Charter School Network, Brittany Feju, nurse practitioner and research associate for the Center for Immunization Research here at Johns Hopkins, Leni Jian, associate professor in School of Education here at Hopkins, and Ruth Baden, founder of the Berman Institute and eSchool Plus. She's going to serve as our moderator. So finally, I just want to say a big thank you to our entire eSchool Plus team who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes to bring this whole project to fruition. And finally, just to remind you that the Johns Hopkins University eSchool Plus initiative is a collaboration between the Consortium for School-Based Health Solutions, the Berman Institute of Bioethics, and the Johns Hopkins Schools of Education, Medicine, and Public Health. So thanks so much for joining us. My name is Sara Johnson, and it's really been my pleasure and privilege to serve as your moderator. We're really looking forward to continuing this conversation next week. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.